Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Hey, Chris, really glad to be here today because we've got a story that I think perfectly captures where AI is heading in a field that actually matters to every single person listening.
Absolutely, and that field is healthcare, which is something we haven't dug into for a while. And honestly, the pace of change there in just the last few weeks has been staggering.
So here's the big picture framing for today's conversation. The FDA is fundamentally rethinking what it means for an AI medical device to qualify as a breakthrough, and the implications are enormous.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit, because when most people hear FDA breakthrough designation, they probably think of a new cancer drug or some revolutionary surgical technique, not necessarily software.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting because the FDA's Breakthrough Device Program has been around since 2016. And since then, they've designated over 1,200 devices total as breakthrough, which gives them priority review status.
1,200 devices is a lot, and I'm guessing that the bar for what qualifies has been changing pretty dramatically as AI capabilities have accelerated and evolved over the past couple of years.
You're spot on, and here's the shift that really matters. The FDA is no longer impressed by AI that simply makes a doctor a little bit better or a little bit faster at something they can already do on their own.
So the bar has moved from incremental improvement to something much more ambitious, which honestly makes a lot of sense given where the technology is now.
Right. The agency is now prioritizing what they call multi-problem AI solutions, meaning systems that can do things that physicians literally cannot do on their own, like detecting multiple cancer types from a single image or predicting mortality risk from complex data patterns.
That's a really significant philosophical shift, because you're basically saying the FDA wants AI that expands what's medically possible, not just AI that makes existing workflows more efficient.
And I think the best way to illustrate this shift is with two specific examples that have gotten breakthrough designation recently, starting with one that honestly blew my mind when I first read about it.
All right, I'm ready to have my mind blown. So go ahead and tell me about this first example, because I can tell from your tone that it's something pretty remarkable.
So there's a company called Noah Labs, and they've developed a system called Vox that can detect worsening heart failure from a 5-second voice recording. And yes, I said 5 seconds.
Wait, so you're telling me that an AI can listen to someone speak for just 5 seconds and determine whether their heart failure is getting worse? Because that sounds almost impossibly futuristic.
It does sound futuristic, but the science is actually really solid. Because what Vox does is extract and analyze acoustic features from your voice that correspond to physiological changes in your body related to pulmonary congestion and fluid overload.
So essentially, the AI is picking up on subtle vocal changes that a human ear simply cannot detect, things that indicate your lungs are filling with fluid or your heart isn't pumping efficiently.
Exactly, and the training data behind this is massive because they used over 3 million voice samples to build the algorithm. And it's been validated across 5 multi-center clinical trials in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic and UCSF.
Those are not small name institutions. And the fact that it's been through 5 separate multi-center trials suggests that the clinical evidence behind this is genuinely robust and reproducible.
And here's why this qualifies under the FDA's new standard for breakthrough. No physician on earth can listen to your voice for 5 seconds and tell you that your heart failure is deteriorating.
Right, that's the key distinction, because this isn't making a cardiologist slightly better at their job. It's doing something that was literally impossible before the AI existed.
The practical application is incredible too, because imagine heart failure patients at home doing a 5-second voice check-in on their phone every morning instead of waiting for symptoms to become so severe that they end up in the emergency room.
That kind of early detection could save an enormous number of lives and also massively reduce healthcare costs, because emergency heart failure admissions are incredibly expensive.
Heart failure affects over 6 million Americans and is one of the leading causes of hospitalization in the United States, costing the healthcare system tens of billions of dollars every year. So if you can catch deterioration days or weeks earlier through a simple voice recording, the impact at population scale is absolutely tremendous.
And I think what really strikes me about the Vox system is how frictionless it is compared to traditional monitoring, because asking a patient to record 5 seconds of their voice every morning is so much more accessible than hooking them up to remote monitoring equipment. Now, you mentioned there was a second example that illustrates this shift in FDA thinking. So tell me about that one, because I'm curious how it compares to the voice detection system.
The second one is completely different but equally fascinating. And it involves a company called RecovryAI that has built what's essentially an LLM-powered virtual care assistant for patients recovering from surgery.
So this is a generative AI chatbot that's been designated as a breakthrough medical device by the FDA, which feels like a really significant milestone for the entire field of conversational AI in healthcare.
It really is, and here's how it works. After you have a total knee or hip replacement, your surgeon literally prescribes this virtual care assistant to you, and for 30 days, it checks in with you twice daily.
That's fascinating because you're saying this AI is actually prescribed like a medication, which suggests the FDA is treating conversational AI as a legitimate clinical intervention, not just a convenience tool.
Exactly. And during those twice daily check-ins, the AI asks about your sleep patterns, activity levels, diet, pain levels, and other recovery milestones, providing guidance drawn from established clinical protocols and escalating to your care team when something seems off.
I can see how this fills an enormous gap in post-surgical care, because most patients go home after a major joint replacement and basically have to figure things out on their own until their next office visit.
And the clinical significance is huge because if RecovryAI gets full authorization, it would actually establish an entirely new device classification at the FDA, creating the regulatory framework for future patient-facing clinical AI devices.
So this isn't just about one product getting approved, it's about creating the legal and regulatory scaffolding for an entire new category of AI-powered medical care.
Right, and their pivotal clinical study is already underway at multiple sites, including Ortho Arizona, which is one of the nation's largest orthopedic practices, and Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore.
Now, I want to zoom out a bit because these two examples are really compelling individually, but I think there's a broader regulatory story happening here that connects everything together.
Absolutely, and this is where it gets really interesting because in January of this year, FDA Commissioner Makary announced at the Consumer Electronics Show that the agency was making sweeping changes to how it oversees AI-enabled medical devices.
Commissioner Makary, making that announcement at CES rather than at a medical conference feels very intentional, like the FDA is signaling that it wants to engage with the technology industry directly.
Great observation, and the substance of what he announced was significant. The FDA published revised guidance that fundamentally relaxes the rules for clinical decision support software, which includes a huge number of AI-enabled products that help doctors with diagnoses and treatment.
So what specifically changed in these revised guidelines? Because I imagine there were certain types of AI products that previously needed FDA review that now can go straight to market.
The biggest single change is that products delivering a single clinical recommendation can now enter the market without FDA review, as long as they meet certain other criteria for escaping regulation.
That's a massive shift because it essentially creates a fast lane for a whole category of AI diagnostic tools that were previously bottlenecked in the FDA approval process.
And it goes even further than that because the FDA also expanded its wellness device category to include non-invasive products that estimate blood pressure, oxygen saturation, blood glucose, and heart rate variability.
So smartwatches and wearables that measure those vital signs could now potentially be classified as wellness devices rather than medical devices, which dramatically lowers the regulatory burden for those companies.
Exactly. And Commissioner Makary himself said the agency is developing what he called a new regulatory framework for AI that is, and I'm quoting directly here, smarter and more forward-thinking.
I find it really interesting that you have this dual movement happening simultaneously, where on one hand, the FDA is raising the bar for what counts as a true breakthrough, but on the other hand, it's lowering barriers for more routine AI applications.
That's the perfect way to frame it, because what the FDA is essentially doing is creating a tiered system where the most ambitious and transformative AI gets the breakthrough fast track with intensive support and oversight,
while the more incremental or established AI applications get a lighter touch regulatory path, which makes a lot of practical sense because you don't need the same level of scrutiny for everything.
And I think the implications for the AI industry are enormous because this sends a very clear signal about what kind of healthcare AI the government is willing to champion and support.
If you're a startup building AI that genuinely does something no doctor can do, something previously impossible like detecting heart failure from a voice recording, the FDA is basically rolling out the red carpet for you with priority review and breakthrough status and intensive regulatory support.
But if you're building yet another AI that makes radiology reads 2% faster or helps with scheduling, you might not get that same level of regulatory enthusiasm, even though those tools are still valuable.
I want to ask about the potential risks here, though, because Whenever you relax medical device regulations, there's always a question about whether patient safety could be compromised in the process.
That's an incredibly important question, and one that critics have been raising because the January guidance changes mean that certain AI clinical decision support tools can reach patients without the full FDA review process.
And in healthcare, the stakes of getting that balance wrong are about as high as they can be, because we're talking about systems that influence actual clinical decisions affecting real patients.
Absolutely, and I think the FDA's argument would be that the previous system was so slow and burdensome that it was actually preventing beneficial AI from reaching patients in a timely manner, which has its own safety cost.
That's the classic regulatory tension, right? Where you're trying to balance the risk of moving too fast against the risk of moving too slowly. And both directions have real consequences for patient outcomes.
And what's different now compared to even 2 years ago is that we have vastly more clinical evidence about how AI performs in healthcare settings. So the FDA can make more informed decisions about what actually needs intensive oversight.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious about your take on what this means for the broader AI ecosystem. Because healthcare has always been seen as one of the hardest sectors for AI to penetrate due to regulation.
I think what we're seeing is the beginning of a fundamental unlock. Because when the FDA explicitly signals that it wants transformative AI and creates clear pathways for it, that changes the entire investment calculus for healthcare AI startups.
You're basically saying that the regulatory clarity itself becomes a catalyst for innovation, because entrepreneurs and investors now have a much better understanding of what the FDA will and won't support.
Exactly. And I think we'll look back at this period in 2026 as the moment when AI in medicine went from being an interesting experiment to becoming standard clinical infrastructure, and these FDA changes are a major reason why.
That's a powerful note to end on, and I think it really captures how quickly the ground is shifting underneath this entire industry right now.
And the Noah Labs Vox example is just such a perfect encapsulation of where we're headed, where a 5-second voice recording on your phone every morning could literally save your life by catching something no human doctor on the planet could ever detect on their own.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.